Pokemon Radical Red is back in the spotlight now that it's got a big update in version 2.3b, adding a lot of things like minimum grinding mode, and thank God for that. No more need to worry about stupid EV and IV grinding, saving so much time. And now we also have the brand new hardcore mode, which makes the base Radical Red significantly harder than it already is. Now you'll see stuff like Ultra Beasts in legendaries as soon as Gym 4 in the late game bosses essentially turn into an Uber player's wet dream. Hell, the game even surpasses Uber tiers and goes flat out anything Ghost tier with custom field effects that can't even be removed even if you tried, like residual sun damage. What the hell? To be honest, this optional game mode, while being very hard to beat on the surface, especially if you're not using docks to essentially spoil every boss battle for yourself like a bitch. To be honest, it's not really that hard to beat once you get the hang of it. As long as you use your brain and think about how to counter certain threats, you should be fine eventually. Unless you're Nuzlocke in this game, in which case you're probably screwed either way. Unless you're universal brain like this guy Buhrito here, who's the first person to successfully Nuzlocke hardcore mode on stream, with a flipping slurpuff on his team for the champion of all things. It's madness. But honestly, I would not recommend Nuzlocking this game in hardcore mode unless you literally have no life outside of Nuzlocking and want to spend hours upon hours just doing calcs and looking at docs. It's still nowhere near as bad as Emerald Kaizo. To Nuzlocke that game, your life really has to be devoid of everything except Nuzlocking to even have a chance of pulling that off. But to show you how very manageable Radical Red hardcore mode is to play normally, I did a run where I can only use quote unquote bad or obscure Pokemon, a Trashlock of sorts where I'm limited to only using Pokemon that are ranked in the PU Smoke On tier or below, pretty much the worst of the worst. So very obscure and uncompetitive mons, Pokemon like Carnivine and Heatmore. I know everyone's going to say, "Oh, Mr. Nuzlocke Enjoyer, most of these Pokemon got buffed in Radical Red." Well, yes, but almost all of them are still trash tier, unfortunately. Seviper still isn't quite cut out for the OU tier. Hell, even the RU tier is too much for it. But the real reason for this challenge, and why I really recommend it for a fun run for anyone, is because this challenge actually incentivizes you to use Pokemon that you would otherwise never get to use in any other game. Rather than using like Garchomp or Ferrothorn for the 100th time, now you've got to rely on Centiskorch and Eviolite Golbat. Apart from PU only, there's no real rules with the challenge, as hardcore mode automatically prevents any cheesy methods like setup or weather abuse. If a mon is PU or below, it's allowed, based off of Gen 8 viability rankings. If the mon isn't in Gen 8, like Simisear for example, then I just go with its rankings from Gen 7 of that mon. And while there is a proper Radical Red Showdown server that I could use, the problem is that only goes down to UU tier, so there is no proper low tier trash tier list yet. The only big rule of this challenge is I did allow some mega evolutions, as the vast majority of megas are too good in terms of rankings. I made the point of only allowing the custom Radical Red mega forms of mons that are already in the PU tier, as these mega forms are really obscure and they do feel quite underpowered for the most part anyways. So Mega Machamp is not allowed, as that's a custom form that I feel is just way too strong. Base Machamp is in the NU tier, and for God's sake, Mega form of Machamp, it's like Mega Kangaskhan Incarnate, way too good. Same reasoning for Mega Duraludon. However, there are a lot of Mega forms that you could use for the Trashlock. Mega Orbeetle is unfortunately the worst one, by quite a bit. Does barely anything endgame. And Mega Centiskorch, well, by no means being OP at all, does have some nice niche uses for it with its mountaineering ability. Mega Kingler has a sauce though. Overall, there's a humongous amount of PU mons to use, so even though you're limiting yourself to using only lower tiered mons, I end up having over 7 full boxes of different mons to use. Good lord, you still have so much choice. It gets really mind-boggling at times. It can be almost overwhelming. But with that, here's my best team that I came up with for the Elite Four. there are a few gems in the rough, even though I'm only using the quote-unquote lower ranked mons. Okay, so here's the PU team that I use for Elite 4 now. I would say this team worked really well. There are a lot of other mons that you also could have used, but they might have been probably more optimal, but it's really hard to say because there's so many options and there's so many combinations. It's really hard to come up with one perfect PU team, but these are probably 6 of some of the best and strongest PU mons that are available to you, so I can't just put them all on the team. Like, there is some synergy, but this can work really well. So the first mon, and this is a really surprising one, is Simisear. Now, this is the fire monkey, not Infernape, the good fire monkey. Infernape is just Simisear at home. Why? Well, his stats haven't been changed. Go Timid Nature and go Choice Scarf. But its ability, it now gets Sage Power, which is Gorilla Mode for special attacks. It's basically free choice specs, and that is crazy. All the elemental monkeys get it. Combine that with Choice Scarf, you now have a +1 to special attack and speed. This thing is really good. With its base 102 speed and Timid Nature, it basically outspeeds everything in the Pokemon League, and it's going to hit very hard. The only problem with this is that its coverage isn't that good, but Flamethrower, Fire Blast and Grass Knots is pretty workable. You do hit a lot of things super effectively. For example, you can one-shot Glaceon, you can one-shot Zacian and Zamazenta in their super forms after close combat with Flamethrower, and I think you can one-shot both of them with Fire Blast even if they're not at -1 from close combat. I think that is a rangeable, but that's still really impressive, and you outspeed them too. I think if you go choice spec, you can definitely one-shot Melmetal as well. Also, Grass Knot with Timid and Choice Scarf is enough to outspeed and almost always one-shot Mega Swampert, so that is really good. Simisear is really good throughout the whole game, especially the fact that you get it really early. In Elite 4, it does get a little bit power crept by this point obviously, but it's still very solid, and I totally recommend it. I'll say the fire one's probably the best because you do need some good fire coverage for all the steel types and ice types you'll be fighting in Elite 4. The other 2 monkeys are really good, but there are other water types you could be using. The next mon that I'll be bringing, and this is pretty much almost a mainstay for most of the game, Electrode. Now, Electrode isn't... Oh, it's a mediocre mon in base game, but in this game, it gets 3 big changes. First of all, its special attack is now base 100, so that's a pretty nice increase. Second of all, it gets Galvanize, which basically gives it a free 30% power boost. And third of all, it now gets access to Hyper Voice to really make use of that Galvanize. So Hyper Voice will be effectively 117 base power with stab, with 100 special attack, and the best thing, this outspeeds almost literally everything in the Pokemon League. You can run Modest Nature, though you might want Timid to outspeed like the legendary dogs, but because Monkey handles that anyways, this can just go Modest with choice specs. So special attack is going to be really high, even higher than Fire Monkey, and that is saying something, especially with Galvanized Hyper Voice. That's pretty much the extent of what it does. You can also run other moves like, I guess, Foul Play, Volt Switch, Mirror Coat. Hyper Voice is usually the extent of what you're going to be doing with this, but it's still very solid. Extremely fast and hits very hard. The next mon, and this is really something, is Floatzel. Now, I know for a joke I like to say that Urshifu Water is basically Floatzel at home. I mean, probably not, but Floatzel is really strong, and this is probably, out of all the PU mons, this is probably one of the PU mons that got the biggest buff, and one of the few PU mons that can actually Transcendence tier and be pretty viable in the upper use tiers. I believe with Radical Red Showdown, this is actually really strong. Why is it strong? Well, with Jolly Nature, it's very fast. 115 speed lets it outspeed everything. Its physical attack did get nerfed. Its physical attack went from 105 to 90, which makes it look pretty bad. It's actually like, but the same as its special attack, which is really weird, and it's pretty frail. but it now gets access to Technician. In Technician, it's a really good ability, obviously. Fake Out and Aqua Jet are very nice. Fake Out especially. But what makes this really, really good is Surging Strike. Yep. This thing gets Surging Strike. Basically an effective 112 base power water move that ignores all stat changes. This is just incredible. With Technician, this has an effective 135 physical attack, which is actually like a tiny bit stronger than Urshifu. Combined with Fake Out, you can get even more damage on top of it. It has Ice Punch as well for dragon coverage, I guess, though you almost never click anything that's not Fake Out and Surging Strike, and I guess Aqua Jet is there just in case you miss a range you need to KO something, but this is really hard. I really like it. It also gets Flip Turn if you'll do some pivoting shenanigans. This is really good against Lorelei. It's actually capable of one-shotting Landorus because obviously the Intimidate just does nothing. So if you're going to build a PU team, I really recommend Floatzel. You won't regret it. I would say either go... Sometimes you could go Choice Band, but I would say Life Orb is probably better because you also want to get the Fake Out. Fake Out does allow you to get certain ranges. Also, like for example against Bruno's Infernape, you can use Surging Strike because that will just ignore the Focus Sash, which is really nice, and you do outspeed it, so that's really good. Now, it's time for the spicy mons in the team. The first one is a legendary. Articuno is one of like the only 2 legendaries in the PU tier. I think the other one is like Uxie, which is quite surprising, but I want to use Articuno also because no one ever uses it and it's usually considered the worst legendary, but in Radical Red, it's actually not bad. It's really not. The stat changes are, this thing, it got minus 15 attack, but it got plus 20 to its speed stat, so 105 speed is actually pretty respectable, and its ability got changed to Shield Dust. Now, Shield Dust, ignoring hazard damage is really good, though in the Elite Four, hazards don't actually make too much of a difference. Being immune to Stealth Rocks is really nice, but you're not going to come up against that often in hardcore mode anyways. What I really like about this is its typing and the fact that it gets U-turn in Freeze Dry. Freeze Dry is really good against Lorelei. It hits Swampert, Palkia, Ludicolo and Kingdra all 4 times super effectively, which is really nice. Another really good thing in the Lorelei matchup is that Shield Dust makes it so when a Ludicolo fakes you out, you don't get flinched, so you just destroy it. It has really respectable bulk, especially special defense. U-turn is also like really interesting for pivoting, and Ice Beam and Hurricane are just really good damage options. It now gets access to Aura Sphere, so there are some other moves you can give it. Aura Sphere is pretty good. And the item does depend from each Elite Four member. For Lorelei, for example, and for Agatha, I would recommend Choice Beck, but for Lance, you might want Choice Scarf instead to outspeed like Mega Rayquaza. But this is a very solid mon, so I do like it. Next up is, oh boy, Big Guzz, the Guzzlord. This thing is crazy. It's probably one of the better Ultra Beasts now, unironically. As in base game, this is literally the worst ranked Ultra Beast. This thing is now monstrous. So, you might notice a lot of things about this are changing now. This thing has been souped up to a crazy extent. Stat-wise, its HP is being reduced by 20, but both of its defenses have been increased by 20 to their base stats also. That doesn't seem like a big deal, but that is actually a very significant increase to its bulk, because HP going from 223 to 203, that's only like a 10% decrease, I think not even. Whereas both of its defenses, physical and special, going from 53 to 73, that's like 40% increase. So overall this thing is way bulkier and it can really take hits. It's really hard for this thing to get one-shot. Even super effective moves don't one-shot it. Even Drain Kiss from Calyrex doesn't one-shot it, even though it's 4 times super effective. Even quite a few dragon moves from Lance are not able to one-shot without boosts. this thing can really take a hit. It's incredibly slow, but its attack is really high. Combined with Dark Aura, this thing is really powerful. And then we go to its movesets. It gets some really good utility. Draco Hammer is a very powerful move and it is really strong against Lance. However, Crunch or Knockoff in Sucker Punch, you're going to be using those moves most of the time. It also gets Parting Shot for really nice pivoting, though I barely ever need to use that. Sucker Punch is such a good move against Lorelei and Bruno and Lance. And the champion as well, actually, because it hits really hard. The AI is really bad at playing around Sucker Punch because they don't really understand how priority works. And they don't really understand how to play around Sucker Punch, like in failing. But it also completely bypasses Guzzlord's really bad speed. It also has very good matchups. Like in Lorelei, you can just bring this in, revenge kill, whatever you want with Choice Band. For Bruno, you can give it Expert Belt. You can switch it in, and this thing always counters the Ultra Necrozma line thingy. The Soul Galio Super Saiyan thing, whatever that is. I'm not that familiar with Gen 7, but you know what I'm talking about. It also completely destroys the Ultra Lunala on the Champions team. Just switch it in, knock off, then Sucker Punch, and you always destroy it. It's pretty awesome. This thing is also capable of just switching in Agatha's Expanding Force. It can switch in on Calyrex and one-shots it with Crunch, even though it's got a Dark Reducing Berry, which is pretty awesome. The one really annoying thing that stops Guzzlord from just going off completely is the fact that Agatha has Psychic Terrain automatically, so Sucker Punch does not work. That's really unfortunate. Otherwise, Guzzlord would destroy like a lot of her team, but this thing, it's so good. In terms of raw stat total, this is just the best. And the final mon on the team is a Mega. Now, there are several unranked Megas that you could use. Most of them are just the 8 Radical Red custom original ones like Mega Orbital and such, but I'd say Mega Drednaw, and this is really, really nice. So when it Mega evolves, it becomes Water Fighting. And stat-wise, it's got 90 HP, 155 physical attack, 125 physical defense, 98 special defense, and 85 speed. So this thing is really tanky. It's really hard to one-shot this, especially in the physical side. I think like Expanding Force is the only thing that just flat out one-shots it, and the fact that it changes typing is also really good because it can trick the AI, which I really like. Its ability becomes Strong Jaw, and combined with its moveset Ice Fang, Aqua Fang, and Jaw Lock, this thing can deal a lot of damage, and it's got priority to finish off anything that's weakened. So this is just a very solid mon. It can hit a lot of the Steel type super effectively, and Ice Fang is pretty good against Lance also. It's just a very solid mon. It's a pretty good Mega actually. It's really not that bad. I would recommend it. Out of the PU only Mega Evolutions, I would say this one's probably the best. Like Mega Centiskorch you could also consider, but I think this complements the rest of the team more effectively. So that's pretty much the team right there. Lorelei's first, and while the Elite Four does sound absolutely ludicrous on paper, they're doable once you figure out the optimal order of play to get around them. You just need to know what exact play to make and when to do it. So Lorelei is definitely the easiest one. Not much thought is required once you get the hang of her. The heal team is definitely an easier one due to my type matchups and the fact that she doesn't abuse the hail as much as she abuses the rain on that team. Her leads get absolutely demolished. Floatzel can easily destroy Landers as it doesn't even care about Intimidate, while Fire Monkey can just roast Glaceon in one hit. Aquajet plus Flamethrower easily disposes of the Focus Sash Bear Tech. I would recommend taking that out as that's got Slush Rush, so it can actually outspeed your Floatzel in one shot with close combat, so take that out. Then I sack my leads by beating the Kyurem White and damaging the Tapu. I feel sacking my leads is definitely worth it because now I've got 4 healthy mons left and Lorelei only has like 1.5. Double super effective attacks can finish off the Tapu, then simply gang up on the final Mega Bombasnow and beat it. Mega Drednaw can actually switch in on the Mega Bombasnow and beat it, which is pretty awesome. It's really bulky. This is as easy to guess with only 2 losses, but things only get harder from here. Now, Bruno isn't too much harder than Lorelei, but it does require you to play in a way that's a lot more specific to counter him. There's a lot less room for misplays and errors. Any misplays and you can easily get swept by Zorua. In the legendary dogs, is they're just way too powerful to handle outside of very specific matchups. So Floatzel is the best lead here, especially if Bruno leads Infernape. I can easily outspeed and 1KO it through the Focus Sash, which is pretty awesome. Surging Strike is a really good move. This beats Shield Dog, which I have basically no counter for, so how do I handle it? Well, I have to sack Articuno, but by giving it Rocky Helmet, Fire Monkey is just able to safely KO it with Flamethrower, which is pretty damn strong by the way. Necrozma always comes in next, and that gets hard countered by Guzzlord, which is pretty awesome, baiting in Sword Dog Sif, the Grey Wolf, who I have to sack to once again, but after close combat, Monkey can always one-shot it with Flamethrower. Well, Zorua sounds like an absolute monster threat. For some reason, it always spams Bulk Up, giving you time to beat it. Sacking 1 Montu is fine, but after that, Bruno only has Mega Lucario left, which loses 1 vs 1 to my own Mega Drednaw. Well, I still have 2 other Mons in reserve to beat it, which is pretty nice. But unfortunately, this is where the challenge really starts, is Agatha is way harder. This is where RNG really starts to become needed to consistently win. The biggest issue with her is the perma-psychic terrain, completely ruining Big Guzz's chance to go off with Choice Banded Dark or a super effective Sucker Punch. At least her lead Pokemon is easy though. Crocodile takes a Stone Cold Surging Strikes to the face. But this time, Focus Sash is needed to safely chip the Mega Mewtwo X. My only way to beat this without too many losses was to sack Floatzel, chip it, then finish it off with something else. Then the Calyrex can easily be countered by Guzzlord, being immune to Expanding Force and impressively one-shotting it through the berry. Now Victini is probably the biggest threat here, as once it celebrates, there's a very good chance that you just lose to it. It's really hard to beat once it sets up. I somehow took a Focus Blast and managed to beat it in return somehow. I would recommend Careful Nature on Guzzlord to make this more consistent to do. The Yveltal is Assault Vested and is such a pain. I need the Chesto Berry Electrode on it, and even that was not able to two-shot it. Oh well. At this point I've only got 3 Mons left to win with. Fire Monkey can clean up, and even then Articuno usually beats the final Zarudi 1 vs 1, so that's pretty good. So the main issue here is the Psychic Terrain. This took a lot longer to figure out how to beat, but I eventually got through with half my team still alive. If I look crazy enough, Lance's team is even more whack, even more RNG reliant than Agatha was. Floatzel, funnily enough, easily handles the lead. For some reason, if you click Fake Out, then you Surging Strike, Deoxys will never set up hazards for some reason, whereas if you just use Surging Strike first thing, the Deoxys will set up hazards, so the last thing you want is to deal with Stealth Rocks. Now the only way I managed to win was by baiting out Lance's Mons in a very specific order. So the plays were very convoluted as a result. I had to sack Simisear to beat Melmetal with Rocky Helmet. I can chip it so Guzzlord can finish it off, as I need Arceus Fury to come in next after this. I then need to sack Electrode to it so Floatzel can finish it off with Fake Out plus Aqua Jet. This is where things get really dicey, as Primal Dialga is very hard to beat. It kept stalling and super effective moves just were not doing enough damage to it. Even Jawlock Drednaw with Strong Jaw just was not doing enough. But for some reason, the AI actually chokes here really hard and hard switches to Rayquaza on my Articuno. But why? Well, I won't complain. Take the free KOs effectively. But this still doesn't fix the problem of the Primal Dialga. You basically need to have at least some level of luck here to win with this team. Once the Dialga's asleep, it can essentially do whatever it wants, now that it's 2 vs 1 against me, which is a very bad matchup. Big Guzzlord has to win this now. But now it can actually outspeed and KO the Dialga, as its sleep counter is run out and Roar of Time is now negative priority, so I can finally beat the Primal Dialga, and it's all down to the 1 vs 1 Dragonite. I can two-shot it, as long as I take a +1 Z move, which I barely take, good lord. Finally, I found a way to be the Elite Four, but if you thought this was meme-tastic enough, just wait until you see the champion's team. He's on a whole nother level. Hell, he even has multiple Mega forms and Primal forms. You know this team is cracked when Mega Swampert in the rain is his weakest mon, and the strongest mon has better stats than Mega Rayquaza. I don't know how I was able to beat him as easily as I ended up doing. When I fought him blind for the very first time and saw his team, without any prior knowledge, I freaked out hard. I legit thought that I would not be able to win with this team at all. After all, nothing really damages Primal Alternatives that much, and Simisear can't even use any fire moves. But in hindsight, I actually lucked it quite a bit, as it turns out that the Charmander starter team is by far the easiest one, as the other two champion teams have Geomancy Xerneas on them, and I literally have no way of beating that, so at least now I've kind of got a chance. Okay, so Focus Sash Electrode can beat Primal Kyogre. Next comes Arceus, normal, which Drednaw can actually come in and beat it with super strong Jaw Lock and Aqua Jet. Super Saiyan Necrozma once again gets hard countered by Guzzlord. Now is a flipping Mega Eternatus. What even is this? I literally have to throw whatever I can at it and hope I don't get unlucky. Choice Scarf Modest Articuno was somehow able to two-shot this thing with Ice Beam while tanking Thunder. That was really good. That was definitely some like min-max roll going on. 2 more months to go. Ash Simisear really isn't needed here because it can't use its fire moves at all. I just sack it to the Mega Metagross. With Rocky Helmet plus Rain Boosted Floatzel, I can actually take it out, leaving one more mon left, Swampert. Now, the champion definitely should have Mega Evolved with Swampert instead of the Metagross, but oh well, that's his mistake. As now Articuno can just come in and blast it with Freeze Dry, making this surprisingly manageable to win. It's funny how at first I thought this would be completely undoable, but eventually through thoughtful planning and enough trial and error, I was able to win easily enough. Just goes to show how important having a strategy is and actually being able to use your brain. So yes, you can beat Radical Red with conventionally obscure mons like Simisear. If only it was this strong in the base games, that would be something. Man, where's my Sage Mode, Green Freak? I want my Pokmonkey. So this concludes the video, and overall this challenge was kind of a breath of fresh air, as it let me use really weird mons that I would have otherwise never used before, like Greedent and flipping Behemoth. I will say these mons I used were like the pinnacle of the PU tier. They're like the best of the worst, so they're really not that bad. If you wanted to truly take this Trashlock to the next level, you would use the true trash of the trash, the bottom of the PU tier, like Maractus. Can you beat Radical Red with Maractus? Anyways, thank you guys for watching, sub and all that shit, and I'll see you next time. This is Nuzlocke Enjoyer, signing out.